Hey everyone, it's time for another episode of Purple Process. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Hey everyone, this is Nick Miller with Climbing the Pocket with another episode of Purple Process. I first want to thank our sponsors. That's Badass Wood Art, Eastside Jiu-Jitsu, and of course, Lake Monster Brewing. Obviously, as you all know, Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles tendon in the win against the Packers on Sunday, and has a lot of implications for the Vikings both now and into the future. So we're going to try to get into those as much as possible, including the Danielle Hunter situation, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And the Vikings also made a few trades. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit this episode. So I hope you guys all have your nerd thinking minds on, because I really want to think through all the different scenarios and kind of the game theory of what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings front office must be thinking right now, especially given the context of Kwesi's press conference this afternoon. So I'm recording this on Wednesday night. So first, let's get to Kirk Cousins. So Sunday during the game, Kirk Cousins was playing great. The Vikings were, trouncing the Packers. He takes a step back, steps wrongly. His cleat gets stuck. I'm not really sure what happens. He ends up, tearing his Achilles. Obviously, devastating injury for Kirk, especially in the contract year. He was really playing well coming on the last two games. The team's been rallying and won 3 straight. The underlying analytics for the Vikings have improved a lot. If you look at their DVOA numbers, they're the 15th team in the league. I think they're 14th in offense, 10th on defense, which is incredible. I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said it himself today. If you looked at where the Vikings were, even when they were 1-4, the underlying metrics said that they are a better team than what they were, which is something that we've been saying on the show as well. Is that the team has always been outperforming their record so far this year. And I was pushing on Twitter, even at the start of the season, saying that this 2023 Vikings team is better than the team last year, despite the record difference. And sometimes it's just like that. And, I think the Vikings strung together a series of improbable wins last year, and it was all feel good. But when it comes down to the fundamental aspect of how the team is actually playing, this is a relatively strong unit relative or compared to the 2022 Vikings, and they had opportunities for continued growth, especially with the young defense. And the Vikings were playing well without Justin Jefferson, and you assume that they were going to take a step forward, when he came back. So for Kirk Cousins to go down now, it was really kind of a devastating injury, because they had a chance to compete in a very weak NFC with over half a season to go, half a season to gel, and continue to get things, moving in the right direction. It's possible that they were going to make some noise. If you had been following the show the last few weeks, I was definitely a skeptic about what was going on, but it was really undeniable. If you looked at, I'm always driven by the data, just kind of like similar to what Kwesi said in his press conference today. When they're low, typically a little bit higher than what other people are thinking, because all those turnovers and stuff are not indicative of how a team is playing overall. Like, they were able to move the ball. They're doing some things at defenses. They had some defensive backs where the ball just went through their hands and such. And most of that, I'm not going to say it's luck, but whether it was the yips or whatever was going on, they just weren't playing to their. They were playing better than what the final score was predicting. And then when they beat the 49ers, and the Bears, I was on the show saying, they're not as good as you're thinking based upon those games that they just played. I think they went into the 49ers game ranked 16th in DVOA, and they came out 16th in DVOA. And I think that there were some things that the 49ers did, during the game that shot themselves in the foot, kind of like what the Vikings were doing, earlier in the season, that gave a better indication of, how well the Vikings were, or suggested the Vikings were playing better than they actually did. But all kinds of even out, where the Vikings, were about 15th ranked team, in the NFL, kind of in the middle, with opportunities to advance moving forward, especially, hoping that the offense, which has a lot of strengths, and Justin Jefferson coming back, was going to be able to step up their game. And if the defense held anywhere near the top 10, in DVOA, you were, really thinking that the Vikings could make a move once again in a weekend NFC. But all that's out the window now. And so, the brain trust had to get together and think about, okay, what we're going to do moving forward. And this is where it gets really interesting over, the last few days, about how short-term decision-making in the last 72 hours really affected the long-term vision. So let's talk about first the things they did, and then we'll talk about the things they didn't do. So first, They acquired Josh Dobbs via trade. Really, so they sent a 2024 sixth round pick. They got the Cardinals 2024 seventh round pick. However, there is condition based on playing time, as reported by Adam Schefter. We don't really know what that condition is, but it's possible that the Cardinals 2024 seventh could turn into a sixth round pick. Now, I don't think that it's for 2024. I think if there is a lapse in playing time or something, that 2024 or that sixth round pick could be in 2025. Not really sure what the conditions are. I'm just kind of speculating there, but we don't know the full circumstance. Either way, it's negligible. We traded our sixth round pick for a late pick from the Cardinals to acquire Josh Dobbs. So once again, kind of a free trade for Kwesi. He did it earlier with Cam Akers in there. And so kudos to Kwesi for being able to find these moves that are very low impact, not giving up any draft capital when it comes to pick wise, but just moving, late round draft picks. And so it was really essential to get another quarterback in here. I was speculating, and I think a lot of people were saying, is it going to be Colt McCoy? But Colt McCoy hasn't played all year. Josh Dobbs has been starting, the entire season. He's fresh. He could come in. He's shown that he can learn a playbook on the fly and perform well. He's done it a few times already, just within the last 2 years, and so they know that they can get him up to speed fairly quickly to run some version of the offense. That being said, the Vikings are going to roll with Jaren Hall to start this upcoming week, and really, the way that I see it shaping up is, while they did acquire a veteran, Josh Dobbs, Jaren Hall is going to get the first crack at this as the Vikings quarterback, and if he performs well, there's really no reason to move over to Josh Dobbs. So it's Jaren Hall's job to lose. It's not like they invested a third or fourth round pick in Josh Dobbs where they have to absolutely play him. In fact, if you have a rookie that's performing well, that's the best case scenario. So I don't think that this is going to be something where, it's Josh Dobbs no matter what, or Nick Mullins no matter what. But that being said, if Jaren Hall's not up to the task, this team it appears they want to still try to compete this year with how the season's going and their upcoming games and the way that they're talking to, the media about the moves that they're making. And so, based on that, if Jaren Hall can't go, then it's probably going to be Josh Dobbs' show. The other move that they made was as trading Ezra Cleveland to Jacksonville Jaguars for a sixth round pick. And I saw a lot of people fired up about this trade. First of all, it's something that I tweeted out on, I think it was October 4th, and I predicted that they were going to make this move at the trade deadline. I know Miles has been predicting this for a while, too. And so there's, the writing was kind of on the wall with this one, even though some didn't want to believe it. And here are the reasons. One, once they signed Dalton Reisner, it was clear that he was going to get an opportunity at some point based upon his contract. So that's either going to come on the left side of the line or the right side of the line. They made a big investment in Ed Ingram last year with a second round pick. For better or for worse, GMs across the league, and this is universal, don't want to move on from their draft picks. And so they want to give him every opportunity to start and perform and grow. And I think he has. He is definitely a better player than he was last year. Is he a good player? Not yet. But is he improving or at least showing signs of improvement? I would say yes. And so they really didn't want to move Ed Ingram out of the place. So the only logical spot, especially since that's where Dalton Reisner has played his entire career as left guard, was for it to be Ezra Cleveland. Now, Ezra Cleveland's been playing well, according to PFF. But for whatever reason, and this goes to every report that we've been hearing from Darren Wolfson on Score North or the team at the Star Tribune, is that the Vikings weren't very interested in signing Ezra Cleveland. In fact, they had opened the door to possibly trade him in early August. And maybe if they would be able to trade him at that time, maybe they'd sold Dalton Reisner earlier. But that being said, it doesn't seem like Ezra Cleveland is part of their long-term plans. They really seem to like what they have in their depth at that position with either Blake Brandel and also Chris Reed will be coming back soon. He practiced for the first time this afternoon. And they signed Hakeem, I forget his last name, is another interior player. And so they have depth in that middle spot, and it's becoming a little crowded, especially with Chris Reed coming back. They had the ability to make a move. So if you're not looking to sign Ezra Cleveland for the long term, he's not a starter anymore because you want to move on to Dalton Reisner, and you have good depth regardless of it. It seemed very clear that, you want to get something back from a return. So, there are some that saying, oh, he should have went higher, or, he's been playing well, or we could have got a comp pick for him anyway. But here's the thing about comp picks, and this is going to be really essential to the conversation that we're going to have about Danielle Hunter here next. But comp picks, one, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a comp pick before him. There's only 32 comp picks. Every team has a player like Ezra Cleveland that's going to be available, as a free agent. We don't know what his contract's going to be, especially if he lost his starting spot to Dalton Reisner, and other teams are going to notice that. So he's going to be a free agent. So even let's say he was eligible for a round comp pick. So the same thing. One, you got the Carolina Panthers 6th round pick back in the trade, and it's this year instead of 2025. So from that standpoint, you're a whole year earlier and way further up in the 6th round. So it's a lot more valuable. Second, comp picks only happen based on a formula of a team losing players and signing players. So let's say the Vikings were to sign a player to $5 or $6 million this offseason, or something around the range that Ezra Cleveland's going to get from another team. If that happens, they cancel each other out. So you don't get a draft pick for Ezra Cleveland as part of the comp pick formula because you added back what you subtracted. The comp picks are meant to balance out teams losing too many players in free agency to keep a competitive balance. So essentially you upgraded your comp pick from 2005 to 2004, and you got a guaranteed pick for him when there's no guarantee that you're even going to get a comp pick for him in 2025. So in my mind, that was a no-brainer. The only reason why you wouldn't want to do that trade if you thought Ezra Cleveland was part of your long-term plans. That same logic could apply to other players on the roster, which they decided not to move. So if you start with someone like KJ Osborne, the fact that they have Justin Jefferson and they have Jordan Addison, who's really coming on, and they have some other young players, and KJ Osborne's going to, require a pretty decent contract next year. He's probably not part of their long-term plans. Maybe he surprises, maybe he will. But I think that the betting favorite is for him to be playing for a different team next year. So let's say that he signs for, the $7-8 million a year for another team and is aligned for a fifth round comp pick in 2025. Once again, if the Vikings sign someone, which they'll have a little bit of cap space depending upon their other moves that they decide to make, it'll cancel out. And so could you, with Justin Jefferson maybe coming back in a few weeks, Jordan Addison's coming on, you have Brandon Powell. I think Jalen Naylor is about to be activated for this week. He practiced in full today. You got Tristan Jackson. You got N'Keal Harry. Could you have went one more game or two until Justin Jefferson gets back and parted with KJ Osborne now and gotten a guaranteed draft pick instead of trying to rely on a comp pick 2 years from now? That may or may not happen. This is the kind of logic of why I was trying to push some players to get traded before the trade deadline, and especially after Kirk Cousins goes down with a long-term injury. Like, how much is the team actually going to compete this year? Same thing applies for a player like Jordan Hicks. He's, I think, 32 years old. There's very little chance that you're actually going to extend him. And maybe you sign him for another 1-year deal. In that case, okay, if he's part of your plans next year, great. He has been playing a good year. But if you're just going to let him walk in free agency, he's probably not going to get a big contract as a 32, 33-year-old. If you could have gotten a fifth or 6th round pick for him via trade now, these are the kind of moves that you do to add draft capital. So that being said, and I watched Kwesi Duff's press conference today. It sounds like, sorry, my dog there in the background. Hey, Una. So if you, it sounds like from the press conference today, there's a few veterans that went to Kwesi Duff and said, hey, we really like this team's chemistry. We like what's going on in the locker room. That we're gelling really well. Can we keep the team together? And so Kwesi took that to heart. And there's, we're on Purple Process, or I'm on Twitter or whatever, and I'm making all these arguments. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past, where I'm thinking, big picture, process, what's best from an analytical standpoint, what's best to maximize your resources. There is a locker room element to it. And if you're going to, frustrate some of the team's players, because you offloaded some of the veterans, that's something to consideration. It seems like that weighed heavy on Kwesi's mind heading into Tuesday. That being said, all those comments were made before Kirk Cousins went down, with a season-ending injury. So, all those factors in mind, I'm not going to get on Kwesi's case, especially going in knowing that he was asked by veteran leaders not to do it. And it was a very difficult situation before Tuesday, when your starting quarterback goes down on Sunday to make all these decisions. But it is really, something to consider that we probably passed on opportunities to get draft capital back for Jordan Hicks and KJ Osborne that we're just not going to get next year. And we missed that opportunity, and that's okay. I mean, sometimes you gotta pass on that kind of thing for, the locker room chemistry or just the happiness with some of your veteran players, or, and the attempt to try to compete again this year. So where that really changes is the discussion about Danielle Hunter, because we're not talking about a fifth or sixth round pick now. You saw, the Commanders traded their two starting pass rushers, and talk about an analytically focused, office that our front office or new ownership that people are trying to really grapple with, today, why would they would do such a thing. And this isn't the Commanders process though, so we'll pass on that. But they traded, Sweat for a second round pick and Chase Young for a third round pick. So you had to think there were some other needy teams out there, like the, Baltimore Ravens, who were potentially looking for an edge rusher, was at least rumored, or the Jacksonville Jaguars, who couldn't trade their second, third, or fourth round picks, but had draft capital in 2025 that they could have potentially maneuvered some sort of package together to make a move for Danielle Hunter. And I'm sure there were offers. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said as much today when he had a lot of communication with other teams. I mean, when you have a pass rusher who's playing this well, that's got 10 sacks into next year, you really have to there's going to be some calls on him. And so here's where we're getting into the weeds and some of the stuff with Danielle Hunter. So Danielle Hunter is into his final year of his contract. He signed the deal to up his salary this past summer, right before the season. And as part of that deal, you cannot tag him. So with Danielle Hunter, the only two things can really happen from here. You either sign him to extension or he walks and plays for another team. The option to trade him is out the window. This isn't NBA. We don't do sign and trades. So Danielle Hunter has a free path to free agency. Now, we just saw that Rashawn Gary signed a deal for, I think, about $24 million in new money per year. That's probably going to, and that's a team-friendly re-signing. So that was not open market. So Rashawn Gary wanted to stay a Packer, and he signed the deal with the Packers. When you reach free agency, there's usually a premium on that because you have such a bidding war with other players. So, going into this, Danielle Hunter, coming off potentially his best season of his career, is looking for that one final payday after multiple times taking contracts with the Vikings that were below market. It would be incredibly foolish of Danielle Hunter, unless he really just loves being a Viking and he just wants to make it happen. He's made so much money, that he just wants to take a team-friendly deal with the Vikings now without even testing, free agency and checking out what his market is. That's great. And as a fan, we want to think about those things. But if you think about yourself from an individual standpoint and you're thinking about this is money for your family or passed down generations, or, you have to live off this for the rest of your life, or you want to support your parents or your cousins or whoever, your friends, whoever it might be, and you're passing up on $2 or $3 million per year for the next 3 years. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're asking an individual to pass on $10 million just so he can keep playing for your team for the next 3 years when he has his whole life in front of him, I think it's a really tough ask. And so I know that personally, I probably wouldn't do that, and I don't want to rely on Danielle Hunter to do that. So I'm just guessing that his agent and everyone around him is going to suggest that he go and test the market completely. And so he reaches that open market. And so the Vikings can make their best offer. Maybe he takes a small discount to stay with us. But either way, you're looking at mid-20s payday per year for Danielle Hunter. And that's a huge investment for a guy who is, 29 years old and, has some injury history. Maybe that'll bring down his price a little bit on the open market. But, when you're a free agent, there's 32 teams interested in you. Some people have to throw caution to the wind, especially with their kind of in an all-in format. So it's going to be really difficult for the Vikings to compete on that market, knowing that they have to sign, Justin Jefferson this offseason. They have to make room for Christian Darrisaw. They have other areas of the roster that they need to improve. And we haven't even talked about what happens if the Vikings want to sign Kirk Cousins. Do you really think that the Vikings can offer? I mean, we can talk about Kirk Cousins here in a second. Offer talk about someone also who has a free path to free agency in Kirk Cousins. So Kirk Cousins is going to hit the open market. He's going to field offers potentially. I know he says he wants to retire a Viking, but it would make sense for him to consider at least hearing what other teams have to say, or maybe, and that's maybe the leverage he has to try to get the Vikings to come to the table and give him the deal before then, if they want to keep him. And then also Danielle Hunter. And so you've got some of your top franchise players that have free access to the market. and the Vikings might have to pay out the nose of them. Or the other option, if they don't want to pay him and they don't want to extend him at those market rates, is that they walk. Okay, so let's talk about what that means. So let's talk with Danielle Hunter for a second, and then we'll get to the whole Kirk Cousins thing momentarily. So Danielle Hunter, let's say he walks in free agency and he signs with the Jacksonville Jaguars for 24. Let's say he just repeats the average annual value of the Rashawn Gary deal. And he signs for $24 million, and the Vikings don't want to do that. Which, by the way, the Vikings have shown no interest in signing Danielle Hunter to a long-term deal over the last few years. That's why they've done those patchwork deals. If the Vikings really loved Danielle Hunter as a long-term prospect and wanted to buy into him, or as Kwesi Adofo-Mensah would say, he loves flexibility unless he's absolutely certain about something. They could have done this in August. That's what Danielle Hunter wanted. And I guarantee you the deal that Danielle Hunter would have done in August is going to be a lot cheaper than the deal that he's going to want to do in March. And so maybe if we do resign him, Kwesi made a mistake by not doing it. But then again, you can't predict that Danielle Hunter is going to stay healthy and have a career year, picking up 10 sacks in 8 games. But I digress. So let's say Danielle Hunter, goes to the Jaguars, as I made in that example, and you are eligible to he signs a huge contract, so you're eligible to receive a 2025 third round compensatory pick. You only get that draft pick once again if you don't yourself sign it. Let's say the Bears are an incompetent franchise, and so they're unable to get Montez Sweat, signed to a deal, and so the Vikings lost Danielle Hunter, but they want to sign Montez Sweat to $20 million instead. This is just hypotheticals for just get my argument across. They want to sign Montez Sweat to $20 million per year, and also qualifies as a third round comp pick. Well, the fact that you signed Montez Sweat means that you canceled out the Danielle Hunter, deal that you got. So you basically essentially traded Danielle Hunter for Montez Sweat, and you don't get that third round comp pick. So essentially, if you want and you're all bought in as the Vikings, if Danielle Hunter walks to getting that 2025 third round comp pick, then you basically handcuff yourself in your ability to sign a big market free agent, which I know many of you in March are going to be asking for and demanding. If you don't do that, and because you lost Danielle Hunter, and so you need a playmaker in his place, you're going to cancel that out. So that's it's a risky proposition where unless you feel confident and that you're going to sign Danielle Hunter, to not trade him before Tuesday, because you're not going to get a lot of draft capital back for him. And here's the other thing. If let's say they would have traded him to, let's say they traded him to the 49ers, instead of the 49ers trading for Chase Young. So they just give up a third. And I know a lot of you were screaming that you needed a first for him instead. Okay, but let's just say you trade a third for Danielle Hunter. Well, one, that's going to be a third round, normal third round pick, or actually I think the 49ers traded the compensatory pick, but still that's going to be a 2024 third relative to the 2025 third, which once again is not guaranteed. And so the value, if you look at the trade chart, the advanced analytics on trade charts, or the Jimmy Johnson chart, typically a 2025 third is worth the equivalent of a 2024 fourth. So it's usually the round behind, because you have the year delay. The picks are more valuable because they come in the upcoming draft. And so even if you traded Danielle Hunter for a 2024 third round compensatory pick, it's going to be worth a lot more than a 2025 third round compensatory pick, especially when that one's not guaranteed, where if you'd made the trade, it was guaranteed now. And so Kwesi took a big risk by not trading Danielle Hunter. He's either seriously betting that the Vikings are going to be able to resign him, which I think is going to be difficult, or they're betting that they're going to be able to get a compensatory pick, or they're willing to sacrifice that compensatory pick to have Danielle Hunter for the next 9 games. So that's a real, I don't know that I would have made that risk, but once again, if veterans in the locker room are coming and saying, don't trade away our best assets, and we love the gelling of what we're doing, it's a very difficult move for Kwesi to make. And so it's going to be very fascinating to watch over the next, 9 games or into March, what exactly happens to that, and, how smart was it? And here's the other thing. If tomorrow at practice, Danielle Hunter goes out and tears his ACL and he's out for the next 9 months, and he's signed to way below market rate, or even signed, there's a certain window in which a player is even eligible for a compensatory pick. And after that window, if a player signs, the team doesn't get it. It's very, very possible. There's an old football adage, which I think is a little outdated, but basically when you throw the football, there are three things that can happen, and two of them are bad. The one good thing is a completed pass. The other two are interception, or the ball, goes incomplete. And so with this, I think with what happens with Danielle Hunter is there are more opportunities for bad things to happen than there are, a good thing, to happen, which is a Vikings extension. And even with the Vikings extension, it's probably going to be at a much higher rate than, what the Vikings probably wanted to pay him. So it's pretty, and all that factored in. I mean, if Kirk Cousins was still healthy, you could make the argument, like I did at the beginning, that they were getting ready to go on a run, and then obviously it didn't make sense, to make the trade unless some team was going to blow your socks off for the trade. But with Kirk Cousins out for the year, chances are, they're not going to have the same level of competition as they would before, be able to compete or potentially go on a playoff run. And so, what exactly did holding on to Danielle Hunter, get you for the rest of the season, other than either one, the opportunity to pay him market rate, which I don't know if you want to do, or two, he helps you win a few more football games, which lowers your draft pick, and kind of hurts you on that front too. So I don't love what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did. I understand it from a certain standpoint, but we'll have to see how it plays out. We're going to go a little bit long today because there's so much to cover, and so let's talk about Kirk. So Kirk Cousins, obviously has a devastating injury and he's in a contract year. I feel bad for him. There's a number of things at play today, especially given the context of, Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah have done press conferences in the back-to-back days where they heavily suggest that they're very open to signing Kirk Cousins to another extension to play with the team again next year. So this is a pretty complicated one because, let's just start with, where things stood. So the Vikings chose not to extend him this past March. That was a conscious decision, and the reports that we got about what happened in those negotiations is that the Kirk Cousins essentially wanted 2 more full years guaranteed, basically 2024 and 2025 guaranteed. And the Vikings were willing to give 2024 guaranteed, but were not willing to give 2025 guaranteed. And so they said, okay, well, let's see what happens this year. Let's come back to the table and move forward with that. And the reason why I don't think the Vikings want to give 2025 guaranteed is because that's a lot of money to pay for a quarterback, knowing that you had potentially, if you wanted to sign Danielle Hunter, Justin Jefferson's new contract. And then you also had Christian Darrisaw, they needed a new contract, as well as, securing, more talent on your team. And you wanted the opportunity. Obviously, they were looking in this past draft to potentially trade up to draft a rookie quarterback. And so they're potentially looking at getting their next guy of the future. And so you don't want to really buy into a guy for 2 more years. And then Kwesi, mentioned in the past, and he kind of walked it back a little bit today, but he mentioned in the past looking at, okay, when does a quarterback usually start to drop off? What do the numbers suggest about age-wise, and saying, can this guy, play into his late 30s at a high level? And we just look at guys like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers that have been able to do it and think, oh, okay, Kirk can do it too. But you look at also guys like, Matt Ryan, a former MVP of the league, and he just hit a cliff and he completely fell off right around his, 36, 37 age season, which is exactly where, Kirk's looking at. And so, can you guarantee that, Kirk is going to continue to play at a very high level over the next few years? Of course, if we want to be optimists and fans and say, oh yeah, Kirk goes good for another few years, just look at him and how he's been playing this year. But especially when he's coming off a torn Achilles, you don't really know how it's going to go. I mean, he relies a lot on driving off that back foot and stuff. What if the ankle strength just doesn't come back? Like, he's not in his younger 20s anymore, where everything just heals, correctly, exactly how it should. So there's some risk involved in even extending Kirk, in the first place, especially when he's not going to be fully healthy. Probably by the time training camp starts, unless it just has a immaculate recovery. So there's a ton of risk involved here with the Vikings moving forward. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said today, Kirk obviously takes care of his body, and running as a quarterback is not really part of Kirk Cousins' game, and so it doesn't affect him as much as it would, say, Lamar Jackson as he threw out, and that's pretty obvious, and he's got a good point. So, all those factors involved, it's really going to see over the next few months. They're going to be paying very close attention to how he's healing, how quickly he's able to get back out there, what it looks like, because there's going to be some risk one way or another. You either let Kirk walk or you sign him to extension involved in this next decision making. And we don't really know. Obviously they looked into drafting a quarterback highly in the first round this year with all the rumors, and we've practically confirmed they were thinking about trading up. So that being said, they're obviously thinking about it. So does this expedite the plans? Does Kirk's play change anything? There's a lot of unanswered questions, but getting down to the logistics of it is also important. So there's been a lot of talk by a number of our beat writers about what's going on with Kirk's contract, and they all seem to be overlooking one interesting tidbit that friend of Climbing the Pocket, Eric Eager, has pointed out in an article, which I can include when I post this online. But due to a rule in the CBA, you essentially, as a player, cannot sign two contracts in the same calendar year that includes a raise. So the way that Kirk extended this deal and added void years and added on some salary bonus and everything, basically what it taps out to be is Kirk can't sign a contract in March before his void date for any more than $40 million. So he's kind of maxed out. And it was kind of an interesting concept for the Vikings to even do it in the first place. So you take out the Achilles injury, because if, Kirk signs, he can't sign a deal for more than $40 million. They either, one, on Kirk's end, he was planning on taking a hometown discount with the Vikings because the market rate for a quarterback of, a quasi top 10 quarterback for Kirk Cousins is over $40 million at this point. So just looking at the Daniel Jones deal. And so he's either planning on taking a discount, or he was going to try to use that leverage of taking a lower annual value to get more things like another no trade clause, or, potentially another guaranteed year. Or the Vikings were going to use that as an excuse, and Kirk was going to use that as an excuse for him to test the market. And the Vikings were saying, sorry, we can't beat it. So, go ahead and go to San Francisco, go ahead and go to Atlanta or wherever it may be. And we're going to move on with our rookie quarterback. So we don't really know the thinking behind that process, but either way, it's there that as of right now, unless the Vikings adjust and the Vikings and Kirk agree to, extend out that void date and somehow skirt the rules of the CBA. I'm not at that level of an expert. And so he can't sign a deal over $40 million. That being said, he's probably not going to get $40 million right now anyway, unless, there's some team in the open market that really believes in him. Maybe it is San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, and with Brock Purdy, his play being a little bit more questionable this year, that they'll take a risk on him and give him the bag. But chances are, coming off Achilles, when you're an older quarterback, it decreases your market value. And so there could be some wiggle room for Kirk Cousins to come back next year and sign a deal. I put a concept of some parameters, at least from my perspective, if they were going to do it. I don't necessarily think they should, because of the risks I mentioned earlier with aging quarterback and the cap constraints and, unknowing how he's going to recover from his Achilles injury. But if they were to do it, if you're the Vikings, I can't see how you can guarantee anything more than next year. Also, you probably want to tell him, if you do want to do a multi-year contract, we can't do another no trade clause. We can't do another fully guaranteed contract. So, you got to be able to, Kirk, you got to give some on that end if you want that multi-year deal to potentially stay with the Vikings. And then third, you got to be able to tell Kirk, we're planning on drafting a first-round quarterback. So, if you want to play for us for a year, and while he's sitting behind you and grooming, but, you need to know that he's the future and that this is your final year with us. That's the way that I would put it. It seems to be the most, the safest option and the best of both worlds. The Vikings, that, if they wanted to extend Kirk and Kirk wanted to be here, that the new franchise quarterback drafted in the first round could sit behind him for a year, learn from Kirk's professionalism and approach to the game, and then take over the following year. Like, I wouldn't love it from a salary cap implications, but, for the Vikings, it's something that both Kwesi and KOC have talked about being important to them. It could work out now due to the injury more so than it did in the past. One last thing I want to talk about is that there is a little bit of an inconsistency from, I think, what the Vikings say that they're trying to do and their approach to Danielle Hunter and Kirk. So even following Kirk's injury, the Vikings seem to be, they trade for Josh Dobbs and they didn't trade Danielle Hunter because they want to be able to compete this year. And they think that they can either get Jaron Hall or Josh Dobbs or Nick Mullins up to speed, and the defense is playing better, and which is why, presumably they held on to Danielle Hunter. And so I see a lot of fans, on Twitter saying, hey, the season's not over. We can still make a run. Our defense is playing better. Like, we got great weapons. Maybe Josh Dobbs can come in and make a Case Keenum or Nick Foles type run for the Vikings, and we can make a run in the playoffs. Well, here's the thing. If the Vikings are able to make a run this year and they can get competent play out of Josh Dobbs, Jaron Hall, or Nick Mullins, when they're paying them $1 million, what that's going to prove is that KOC and the offensive infrastructure that the Vikings have can be sustained, and they can have success with a much cheaper quarterback, potentially on a rookie deal, and that KOC can scheme them up, and the weapons are, and the system, is really, able to withstand the drop off from a Kirk Cousins level quarterback to a quarterback that's got less experience. And so if they're able to prove that, then, Kirk Cousins, there's no reason to extend Kirk Cousins, in the future. But at the same time, they're speaking on the other side of their mouth and saying, well, Kirk Cousins is, indispensable, and he's playing his best ball, and he's doing so many things that other guys can't do. And, all these fans are here saying, well, Kirk is our franchise and we need to look to extend him next year because he's the best shot we have. If you think that, then chances are the Vikings aren't going to do much of anything over the rest of the season, and they can't compete. And if you're not going to do that, then why did you hold on to those, veterans? Why did you hold on to Danielle Hunter? Because you think you can compete. So it's either Kirk Cousins is indispensable, to the Vikings' chances to succeed, or he's not. If he's indispensable, then this is a lost season, and you should have cut bait and gotten the most draft capital out of it you can. If he's not indispensable, then why are you thinking about potentially still extending him in the future? And I guess there is a threaded needle to come through that we know that Case Keenum was not amazing, and he just had a magical season that maybe can all work at the same time, one or the other. But it just seems like something has to give here, where either the Vikings had no chance to compete this year, and that's fine. They'll get a higher draft pick, potentially use that to go get their first round quarterback, but then you missed out on a lot of opportunities to move players before the deadline, or this team is ready to move forward without Kirk Cousins, and he played his last down for the Vikings. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of conversation plays out over the next few months. I'm not really sure. I'd love to hear some feedback from people about whether that perspective is wrong, but it really just seems a little confusing to me about what's going to happen next, and how those competing factors play there. Either way, this is a massive puzzle that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has to figure out. What are you going to do with Danielle Hunter? You either got to extend him now, or you risk losing him for nothing. What are you going to do with Kirk Cousins? How are you going to find your next franchise quarterback? If you win in the next few games and it moves you out of territory, to go get one of those top guys you think is game changing, is that going to kind of force your hand into back to the negotiating table with Kirk Cousins when he's coming off Achilles, and there's cap space implications where you probably want to be able to invest in some free agents and invest in your players. So I think that we are coming out of this trade deadline with more questions than answers about the future of this franchise, which I thought was very difficult to do because I thought we already had a lot of questions about this competitive rebuild. But this is why we do this show. This is why I love talking football. I've gotten in conversations with a lot of fans before. I love what happens on the field. I'll be fascinated to see what Jaron Hall does this week, and how the Vikings, how does KOC change his offense with either Jaron Hall or with Josh Dobbs, knowing that they actually have some legs. Matt Stafford didn't really have any legs to use. These Vikings quarterbacks the rest of the season do. So, could KOC do some RPO and some other stuff, pull some things out of his back pocket that we've never seen before? And will he like that? There's all kinds of fascinating, X's and O stuff on the field, but I really love the stuff off the field because, it's a economic puzzle. It's a lot of game theory. It's if X happens, what happens with Y, and all these things are intertwined. And it really, the future of the Vikings franchise is really up in the air. And I hope that you can continue to join me in climbing the pocket to figure it all out. So I apologize for going a little bit long this week. There's still more that we need to talk about, but we'll save it for next time. But if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. You must be a cat nerd and really love this off the field stuff too. So hope you have a great week. Skull Vikings. Let's see them if they can rally against the Falcons. Until next time, this is Nick Miller and Climbing the Pocket.